Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. My name is Amanda Schultz-Brochu. I lead the programs at the San Diego Hunger Coalition, and I'm joined by Jay Cass, who is our CalFresh program manager and is really going to be the leading point on the CalFresh contract. So we appreciate everyone's time in being here this afternoon with us. We're going to take some time and go through the contract. If you have questions, we'll take breaks throughout the presentation, and then we'll see as we're moving forward. We may just hold questions until the end, but hopefully we'll be able to get through all of the materials. For those of you who are just joining us, this webinar is going to be recorded to share with organizations. We appreciate any questions or input that you have in the process, and just really are excited to work with everybody as we think about putting together and expanding this funding source for CalFresh application assistance in San Diego County. All right, so I don't know if we have time to have every organization go around and do introductions, but we did want to just share the group of organizations that are considering participating in the next contracting cycle with the Hunger Coalition. We're really excited about the opportunity to have such a wide and diverse group of organizations that are serving an even more diverse set of communities across San Diego County. You know, we'll get into this further on in the webinar, but I think many of you are already aware that San Diego County has a fairly low, comparatively low participation rate compared to other counties in the state of California and the nation, at 60% of eligible residents enrolled in the program. And so we really see increasing enrollment as a team effort, and are really excited to work with your organizations. So the contract is providing, for those of you who may be new to the contract provides federal SNAP outreach dollars that come from USDA and FNS. Those funds are applied for through the California Department of Social Services and then contracted out to a number of contractors. And we'll share a little bit more about how those funds come down. So the contract provides a 35% reimbursement for costs that are related to providing application assistance and outreach for CalFresh. So to share a little bit more about how those funds come down, the funds start with the USDA and they come down through the California Department of Social Services, who then contracts with a number of what they call prime contractors. So the contractor that the Hunger Coalition works with is the California Association of Food Banks. But we just thought it would be helpful to share the landscape so that for those who might be partnering with different organizations, so that you're aware of whom else in San Diego County is receiving funds. So we have 211 San Diego is also a prime contractor, and they really support phone-based application assistance. They do contract out to some community-based organizations in other parts of the state. Catholic Charities also holds a prime contract, and so San Diego, the Archdiocese of San Diego has a contract for CalFresh application assistance, and then Chico State University is working with a number of different universities across the state of California that are receiving contracts. So here, Hunger Coalition is working specifically with the California Association of Food Banks, who primarily works with other food banks across the state of California. And they were actually the organization that started the CalFresh outreach contract. And then Hunger Coalition, we're lucky enough to be able to pass through a lot of those dollars. So Hunger Coalition then has, over time, we've kind of ebbed and flowed between 8 and as many as 15 contracting organizations that we're able to work with to help get more money into San Diego County for this work. So the goals of the contract are pretty straightforward. The primary goal is to increase participation in CalFresh. We also, in addition to increasing participation, we want to increase retention and reduce churn, which means we want to make sure that those individuals who are eligible for benefits and have successfully accessed them through CalFresh are able to maintain their benefits through the semi-annual report and recertification process that is a part of the CalFresh program. Thirdly, we want to improve access to CalFresh by leveraging available technologies, and we'll talk a little bit about what some of those technologies are. So the contract has a number of target populations. Actually, at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Jake to share about those populations.
Sure, thank you. So the goals of the contract, so we want to serve target populations. So these include households with children under the age of 18 with a focus on children under the age of 5, seniors age 60 and above, working low-income households, households receiving SSI, households with language access barriers, college students, veterans and military families, and immigrant families. And if you note those with the asterisk, those are a priority for the Hunger Coalition, specific to San Diego, but they are not the state or federal target populations. And another goal is we really want to create strong partnerships with counties and other stakeholders to provide better client application experiences and program results. So this includes understanding the county's preferred method of application submission, building efforts with other programs, including Women, Infants, and Children, Medi-Cal, area agencies on aging, Covered California, First 5 agencies, and local schools. And also to work with other organizations that are serving those target populations.
So we know that your organizations, a lot of your organizations already have these partnerships in existence. And so it's not necessarily that organizations need to build new partnerships in order to participate in the contract, but just recognizing that those partnerships and collaborations are things that you'll want to highlight when you're putting together your application.
And another goal is to educate potentially eligible participants and address barriers to program participation. So this includes misinformation about who is eligible for the program. We hear a lot of myths, so especially among working low-income households, college students, and households with children under the age of 18. Also perceptions among seniors. Sometimes they feel as though they're taking benefits away from others or that they have less need or reason to enroll. So sometimes it just takes a little more education and relationship building. And then also frustration with the application process. So especially with the amount and the type of information that is required and requested in order to apply for and complete the application process for CalFresh. So the CalFresh contract term, so it's 3 federal fiscal years, and this would begin October 1st of 2021 through November 30th of 2022. And those 3 years would bring us to September 30th of 2024.
Before we move on to the application packet, does anyone have questions about the goals or target populations for this contracting cycle? No. Okay. If you do have questions as we're going to, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we can also adjust them as we're moving forward.
Great, so this is the application packet that you've all received. So we'll go through each of these bullets in more detail throughout the presentation. So the contract application instructions. So this is a comprehensive guide that really will be able to help answer a lot of questions related to that checklist and the required forms. And so the purpose is to break down what these required forms are. And if you have any questions while completing the documents, you can feel free to reach out via phone or email. So this checklist shows what the form is, the format, so whether it's Word or a PDF, and then also the mode of submission. So most of these documents you'll upload through the form assembly link that we had sent out. However, for organizations that do need to submit an indirect cost certification, we'll be able to send that out via DocuSign to make it easy to collect those signatures. So these are the program deliverables. So basically they're estimations of the following categories. So looking at the number of individuals pre-screened using a pre-screening tool, CalFresh applications submitted on behalf of clients. So this can include the number of electronic applications you submit, whether that's through Get CalFresh or My DCW, and then also the number of paper applications submitted. Another data point is the CalFresh applications approved. So we're looking at those approved for electronic applications as well as paper applications. And as Amanda mentioned, a goal is really to make sure that people are not falling off the program. So focusing on semi-annual reports, so SAR 7s, and also the CalFresh recertification applications. Lastly is the number and type of partnerships developed. So on that previous slide, the different collaborations that you're working to do crossover with programs is a great area to be able to focus and report on that number and the type of partnerships that you develop throughout this process.
Thanks, Jake. So the only thing I would add here is as your organizations are putting together your program deliverables, you'll notice in the application instructions that we would anticipate that organizations that are using some form of pre-screening tool will likely have, and just a note that pre-screening is not required if that's not part of your application process or assistance process. If your organization is using a pre-screening tool and plans to utilize that and track, bill for those hours and track those outcomes, we'd anticipate seeing higher numbers of pre-screening than the number of applications submitted. Similarly, we'd anticipate seeing a higher number of applications submitted than the number of applications that are approved, just through the nature of the work, knowing that there will be a number of individuals that won't make it through the process, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, whether it's because of a voluntary withdrawal or there is a barrier to access that prevents them from being able to complete the entire application process, or they're not income eligible for the program. So just keeping those things in mind as you're building out your deliverables is something you want to be thinking about. Oh, I jumped the gun. Sorry, Jake.
No, not a problem. So this, oops. Okay, I'm not on mute. Okay, so these considerations. So you want to distinguish between paper and electronic applications. Some organizations do utilize both methods. And to be sure that the number of applications that are submitted is larger than the number of applications that you anticipate to be approved. And then, as Amanda mentioned, pre-screening is added in as a program deliverable. So using that tool, thinking about how many individuals that you would anticipate pre-screening for CalFresh.
Great. Any questions about program deliverables before we move on to the outreach matrix? Oh, I see. Great question from Ben. So for immigrant populations, are people under DACA eligible for CalFresh? So unfortunately, people who are receiving our DACA recipients are not eligible for CalFresh. And so that's definitely an important consideration when you're putting together your program deliverables and thinking about who your target outreach audience is going to be. Just thinking about working with immigrant populations, we'd be happy to sit down with organizations as you're thinking through your outreach and assistance strategies. It's definitely an area that we're interested in expanding access and understanding to. And so the Hunger Coalition has a wide variety of messaging in both English and Spanish to help you get the word out. We also recognize that for those populations, sometimes it's going to take a number of additional connections, points of connection, to make people feel comfortable with applying for the program, answering any questions, connecting to various resources, including potentially legal resources. So we'd be happy to sit down and talk through what that could look like. Any other questions before we move on to the outreach matrix and the KPI? No? Okay. So the CalFresh Outreach Matrix is a new, new deliverable or new request from the California Department of Social Services. And so it's something that we're definitely still wrapping our heads around, and we actually have a question out to provide you more feedback and input, guidance around how to complete the matrix. But I think the intent of the California Department of Social Services is to support more targeted outreach in communities and ensuring that our outreach efforts are really focusing on eligible communities. And so they have outlined 4 different areas for focusing these performance indicators. We did have some version of this last year, and just to be very candid, there wasn't any follow-up on the state's end about taking a closer look at these performance indicators over time. So I'm not in a space right now to be able to share how significant of a role this has on the application. I think the state is interested in ensuring that organizations are taking a look at how their outreach efforts are really connecting with eligible populations. So the first one is around data and geocoding. So the primary source of data for this KPI, the state is really interested in thinking through and understanding what populations your organizations are targeting with your outreach and application assistance. So they want to know if you can outline the specific target populations, share what data sources you're going to be utilizing to better understand where those populations are located and how to best connect with them. We've outlined a couple of potential data sources for you. So the state has their CalFresh data dashboard. The data that is currently available on that dashboard is county level data. So we are seeking guidance around more regionally specific data sets that might be available for you, and can pass those along if and when we receive them. And we can also pass along, so on an annual basis, our county puts together a CalFresh dashboard that shows where current CalFresh recipients are. Another potential data source would be to look at census data and looking at 200% of the federal poverty level. And then finally, I'd say that, we recognize your organizations have a wealth of data from the communities that you're serving and working with. So if there are other forms of data, whether it's quantitative data that you're looking at or qualitative data, so anecdotal information from having a longstanding presence in a particular community, I think is absolutely appropriate to include in this matrix. So outlining the geographic areas that you're working in, your timelines for implementation. I think this is particularly relevant to organizations that are building up or ramping up outreach activities, and so thinking through how you're going to be growing your program and reaching these communities. I think the feedback here can really be put together in bullets. And then we will definitely get back to you around the use of data and geocoding. So again, I'm not aware that those tools are currently available through this data dashboard on a level that's deeper than county data, but we'll reconnect when we have more information. So the second KPI is around direct service. So asking the kind of how you'll get to the numbers outlined in these program deliverables. And this is more specific to those program deliverables of the assessment, application submission, approval, and then semi-annual reports and recertifications. And then the third KPI is around partnerships. So I'd really just thinking about as you're filling this out, I know this can feel really overwhelming, but I just start with the organizations that your agencies are currently partnering with. If there are other areas that you're interested in exploring, that would be wonderful to include. We're also happy to help. If you're including different areas that you're interested in expanding to, we'll definitely be rolling all of this information up. And so it's a great indicator for us to think about how we're supporting your organizations and expanding that work, whether it's through the CalFresh Task Force and bringing some of those sectors to the table, or making one-on-one connections. We're happy to support however we can. And then the fourth KPI, which has two different sections, I think the majority of organizations, you would probably just be filling out the first section, is around disaster relief. And so in this one, I think they're really just looking for input on the first two, the target populations and methodology. So thinking through, as because we're in an area that's prone to fires, it's there is a form of disaster CalFresh that can help individuals access benefits during that time of disaster. And so again, they're looking for, as the state puts together their disaster plans, understanding which organizations are working in which communities and can help the state relay information and communication in a timely manner will be really helpful. So any existing partnerships or relationships that you have, your service, your target area and population, again, all of this information will be rolled up into the state's disaster plan. For organizations that might be working across counties, this is an opportunity for you to share any plans or systems that you have in place as it relates to larger scale disasters. Do organizations have any questions about these KPIs? Yeah, I know this section is new and it's new to us too. So as we get more information and feedback, we'll make sure we get you guys additional guidance. I'm wondering how comfortable people feel with this matrix as it's outlined. Just at first glance, does this look like something your organizations have information available to complete? Well, maybe another approach to that question is if you, okay, I see a, yes, we have some of information available. As you're starting to fill this out, if you are looking for support, definitely get in touch with Jake or I, or if you have any specific questions, let us know so that we can move some of those questions up to the state. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Jake.
All right, so next is the narrative template. So basically, this would just be a brief description of your organization. It'll also include a description of how your organization will manage accounting, invoicing, and the general fiscal management practices to be in compliance with CAFB and CDSS requirements. So organizations that provide dual screening and enrollment in Medi-Cal and CalFresh would need to describe how the organization can ensure that the cost of staff time is shared across both Medi-Cal and CalFresh programs, and to identify other agencies or programs that the organization partners with and provide a description of how the organization will ensure that the costs are not duplicated. And lastly, it will include state share funding sources. So again, the state share is what the organization is responsible for to be able to meet that 65% match with that 35% rate of reimbursement.
I was just going to share. I think some of the language that the state is looking for in this narrative template is around the types of billing codes and time tracking infrastructure that your organizations have in place to be able to allocate across grant funding streams, including this contract. And so we recognize that a number of your organizations are providing comprehensive services, which is amazing and very much needed. And we also recognize that that can get a little bit messy when we're thinking through time allocation. And so we're really looking to ensure that the organizations that we're working with have really strong tracking mechanisms in place to support invoicing specific to work on this CalFresh program.
Great. And next is the budget templates. So this is going to include your personnel costs, fringe benefits, operating expenses, which we'll get into much more detail in the next few slides, the indirect costs, as well as travel expenses. So there's a budget template for each federal fiscal year that's required, and it should list all the costs associated with your CalFresh Outreach program. So this is a screenshot of what the annual budget detail looks like. So basically, you will include all staff that will be working on CalFresh. So that would be their name, their position title, their salary or anticipated salary, and then the total amount of time that they would be spending on the CalFresh contract. And so one thing to note is for staff that might be looking to expand the program over the next few years, you can easily put in TBD in the name section and include an anticipated position title and what you expect, how much time they would be spending on the contract to kind of be a placeholder to be able to have that budget approved beforehand as we move through the federal fiscal years. So next is going to be the position description. So this is just a brief 1 to 2 sentence description for all of the staff positions listed above. And so if there is a director of programs, that person might oversee the case managers, whereas your CalFresh application assisters may be those ones that are providing that outreach and application assistance for CalFresh. And then there's also fringe benefits. So you'll want to include the fringe benefits and double check that that percentage is in the fringe tab. And so these would be adjusted based on information provided. So next is operating expenses. So basically we created a list of, it's kind of the guidelines of what are some allowable operating expenses for the CalFresh contract and then what is not allowable. So for allowable, this includes anywhere from printing and copying, utilities, insurance, tax audit services, basic office supplies, communication, interpretation or translation services, and then what is considered unallowable. So that would be any consumable products such as food or water, equipment, furniture, and marketing and promotion that is allowed is very limited. And so unallowable expenses would include paid advertisements in the form of media or purchasing promotional items. And although we will talk a little bit about what travel and mileage is acceptable, paying for transportation for clients, such as to and from a county office, whether that's bus passes or mileage for the organization doing the transportation, is an unallowable operating expense.
So yeah, just one final note on here. If your organization has an operating expense that doesn't fall into either of these categories and you're curious whether it could be included on the contract, please reach out to Jake and I. Putting together a list of allowable operating expenses is a new feature that we're offering on this contracting cycle, because we've heard from our organizations that they would prefer more structure and guidance. So these expenses have all been reviewed and approved by our contracting agency, the California Association of Food Banks. But we do want to, try and maintain as much flexibility as possible. So there very well could be additional operating expenses that we haven't considered. And so if there is something else that your organization would like to explore with us, please reach out.
And then one more note on operating expenses is when this CalFresh contract was originally developed, it was tailored for small organizations focused on hunger relief. So we're incredibly lucky to have such a diverse cohort of organizations that do provide CalFresh application assistance, among other much needed services. But we recognize the way that the CalFresh contract was originally built, it may not be worthwhile for all organizations to utilize or bill for operating expenses. So currently, I say less than 50% of our current subcontractors bill for operating expenses. And part of the reason why is the amount of administrative time spent on gathering the backup documentation when it does come out to be a 35% reimbursement. So along with this budget, we include the fixed costs. So these would be a direct benefit to the CalFresh Outreach program. So for example, there might be a telephone line or cell phone for a staff member. So that would be a direct cost specifically for that CalFresh Outreach application assister. Postage, that would also be related to just for the CalFresh Outreach program. So postage used on mail going out to clients, and then also printing specifically for CalFresh. And then next, you'll see prorated costs. So the prorated costs, so here some examples are office supplies, IT support, utilities, internet, telephone, and liability insurance. So the prorated costs, they're non-direct costs that are prorated based on how many full-time employees you have. Has a lot of formulas set into it to be able to calculate what that prorate cost would be.
Great.
And then next is the building costs, which I'll pass over to Amanda.
So this is a new in the last contracting cycle. The state, based on guidance from the USDA, asked organizations to separate out their building costs. And so we're going to go through that. There's two different options for organizations. So if your organization wants to use the current proration that is built into the budget, you'll enter any sort of building costs in the first line. If your organization has your own version of a proration process, you would use the second line of the building costs. So examples of organizations that may have their own proration process that has been standardized, has been reviewed by an auditor, includes food banks or larger institutions. The reason that building costs are separated out is because they are not able to be included as part of the indirect cost rate that is built into the budget. And so USDA has asked that those costs be separated out so that indirect costs can't be built off of the building costs. But again, just going back, so if you want to use the proration that is built into the budget template, you'd put your rent or other building costs into that top line item. So it could be rent or depreciation are really the two options available through the contract. If your organization is larger and has its own pre-approved proration process, you would enter that into the second line item along with the methodology for how you're arriving at that proration process. And then we'll move on to travel. So there's not a lot of travel usually related with CalFresh application assistance, but the most common travel that we see is mileage related to going out and conducting outreach or doing application assistance in various community-based settings. So any mileage that's related to CalFresh application assistance or outreach can be included in this travel section. The other thing that we've actually proactively built into your budgets this time around, just to make it really clear and easy, is we've built in 2 line items. One for travel to the annual peer-to-peer learning meeting that occurs in Northern California that's hosted by the California Association of Food Banks. So we actually just went ahead and entered air travel, estimated air travel, ground transportation, and food for the 2 days that the meeting occurs over. There is lodging, but the lodging is provided by the California Association of Food Banks, so you don't have to worry about including that in any form of budget. And then the second line item that we've included is travel to the annual CalFresh Forum that also occurs in Northern California. So we've included expenses for a single representative from each organization. If your organization is potentially interested in sending additional members, you can go ahead and increase the amount by the totals that are already included on the budget. But we thought that might just make it a little bit easier for organizations to try and anticipate larger travel related expenses for the contract. Similarly, we've included registration fees for both of those events under your other costs. So you've got travel costs and then other costs. So other costs can include one-time purchases related to CalFresh that wouldn't necessarily fit in your ongoing operating expenses. So an example of an other cost would be a pop-up tent that you're using specifically for your CalFresh outreach events. The other costs are broken again into fixed and prorated. So you want to be really clear about how these materials are being used. Are they being used specifically and exclusively for your CalFresh work? If so, they would be placed under fixed costs. If these are purchases that you're making that would be utilized across the organization, including by your CalFresh team members, then it would make the most sense to include them under prorated costs. Great, and then that brings us to indirect. So most of your organizations should have an indirect percentage. Larger institutions are going to have approved federal indirect cost rates. If your organization does have a federally approved indirect cost rate, you need to use that rate in this contract. If you do not have a federally approved indirect cost rate, that's absolutely fine. And we have an indirect cost rate form that the state has created for organizations to develop that cost rate. And it just uses a couple of the items from your audit. So what we'd love to do right now, so we're only going to send out that indirect cost rate form to organizations that don't have a federally approved rate, but it's a separate form that we'd be sending out through DocuSign. So we'd like to take this opportunity, if right now, if you know that your organization does not have a federally approved indirect cost rate, if you can put your organization name in the chat, we'll make sure that we send you a DocuSign document to fill out with that indirect cost rate. Thank you. Oops. Did I miss? Okay. Okay, oh, I think we covered that. And then for those organizations that are using the indirect cost rate form, there is a minimum indirect cost rate of 10%. So if your organization falls below that 10%, we'll round up. I think that takes us to the budget summary. Jake, did you want?
All right. Yeah, so for the budget summary, so basically this worksheet is automatically populated by the data that you enter into the annual budget. So all of those categories that we had gone over. So as you can see, it breaks it down by personnel salaries, fringe benefits, operating expenses, your travel and per diem, if there's any other costs and indirect costs. So the state share, again, that is what is not reimbursable. So it breaks down what that would look like as far as the 65% match that your organization would be responsible for. And then the federal share shows what would be reimbursed. So through the invoice and reporting process, you would receive the reimbursement based on that federal share amount. So for example, if you look at a total program cost for CalFresh, say 175,000, you can see how much that would be reimbursed at the end of each quarter. So again, the operating cost consideration. So all contracting agencies, if you are claiming operating costs, would be required to submit verification and backup documentation for all program costs at some point during the first year of the contract. So sometimes if that administrative burden of providing the verification and gathering that information to submit to show what those costs are is too time consuming, it may be worth to not include those operating costs in your contract. So some cost and time to build in. Again, looking at mileage, even if your staff don't regularly go out of the office, there are some outside meetings to consider. So mileage and also time for participating in the monthly CalFresh task force meetings. So as a part of the contract, it is required for each subcontractor to send at least one representative to our CalFresh task force meetings. We also have CalFresh application assistance webinars and trainings, application assistance 101 that covers eligibility, case advocacy, and then also some specialty trainings. So as you all know, the CalFresh program is constantly changing. So as new rules and guidelines come out, we are always open to offering some more specialized trainings on what the needs of our partners are. And then optional, as Amanda mentioned, there's participation in the annual CFPA CalFresh Forum, and also the CAFB peer-to-peer that takes place one day after. So including that $50 registration fee, as well as per diem, so food while out of town.
Yeah, so this year we built those into the budget, so hopefully that makes it a little bit easier, but it definitely is a voluntary opportunity to pursue, and so it's really up to your organizations if that's something you would like to participate in. For organizations that are new, I think it's a great opportunity for application assisters to connect with other groups that are doing similar work across the state, and to connect with the state who's administering the program. There's a question about if we have to pay for our own travel to Sacramento. So that's a great question. With the peer-to-peer in the past, the travel costs have been covered at 100%, but what we're recommending is that you build those costs into the contract. So the way the contract would work is that you would, for any costs that aren't covered at 100% by the California Association of Food Banks or the state that's administering the contract, you would then be able to build those expenses through your invoice, your contracting invoice on a quarterly basis. Which would mean that you would recoup or be provided with 35% of the expenses for anything that's not already covered. Another really great question was just around whether it's worth building in costs and how we're anticipating, especially during this climate, and that's a really good question. So I know right now a lot of our meetings, a lot of our interactions, whether it's at a programmatic level or client-facing level, is being done virtually. Just given when this contract is set to begin so this contract would begin October 1st of 2021. And I'm going to cross my fingers and my toes and hope that by October 1st, 2021, we're all going to be out and about and moving. But yeah, that is a really good consideration, in that I'm sure that this experience is really going to shift the way that a lot of our organizations are doing business. And so I'd say that's really up to your organizations about how you want to approach the contract, and how you're kind of anticipating and projecting your cost moving forward. You know, and I'd say if you're not certain, which I completely recognize that 4 years is a significant amount of time to try and project into the future. So I would err on the side of covering your more traditional costs of providing services, and understanding that, I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but there is some flexibility. And I think that's one of the benefits of applying with a larger cohort of application assistance organizations, is it gives us, as a cohort, it gives us some flexibility in how we're spending funds over time. Okay, we'll keep going.
Great, so next is the submission requirements. So again, as mentioned, for those organizations that do not already have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, we'll be sending out that certification of indirect costs to easily be signed through DocuSign. But other than that, the application packet that Amanda and I had sent out earlier, those are all the documents that you will submit electronically through the Hunger Coalition form. So that includes the narrative template, the 3 separate budget templates, the outreach KPI matrix, program deliverables worksheet, and then also a copy of your IRS determination letter that's including your nonprofit and tax exempt status, and a copy of your most recent audit. And here is a timeline. Applications we sent out yesterday, and then we're looking to review them beginning the week after Labor Day. So they would be due on the 4th. And again, to feel free to reach out with any questions throughout the process if you have anything you want to run by before submitting that application. And then once we do those reviews, we will then reach out if we have any questions to clarify before then submitting to CAFB with that deadline of being the 11th. Then we are still waiting to find out when those final awards will be announced, but the contract period would begin October 1st of 2021.
Yeah, so I'll just add to that. If for those, I know we've got some veterans on the call today that have worked with this contract for a significant amount of time. If you complete your application early, brownie points, that'll just give us a little more time to review and get back to you with any questions or potential updates. And for those organizations that get information back to us by the 4th. So the 4th is the absolute last day to turn in an application. And then we'll be using that period anywhere from now through the 11th to be communicating with organizations about their application. But if you do end up submitting your application to us on the 4th, then we would anticipate we'll be in communication, kind of fast and furious communication from the 4th through the 11th to answer any questions about the application that's submitted. And so we'll roll everything up into a single application for the California Association of Food Banks, who then rolls it up for California Department of Social Services. So I know it's a quick turnaround, but we really appreciate kind of the back and forth, and we'll do everything we can to try and maximize contracts for everybody. Oh, great. So just a note, this is a 3-year contract. I think we talked a lot about how it's a long time to try and figure out. But that said, I think one of the major benefits is working, applying in such a large cohort. It gives all of us a lot of flexibility. So as an example, for current contracts, usually at the end of the third quarter, we'll go through every federal fiscal year. We go through the contract and look at how all of our partnering organizations are spending down budgets, and also look at the scopes of work and program deliverables, so that we're able to make adjustments within individual organizations' budgets, and then across all of our subcontracting budgets, so that if we have an organization that is just doing an incredible job and is overperforming beyond their deliverables, and they're projected to overspend, but we've got another organization that for one reason or another wasn't able to spend their entire budget or isn't projected to spend their entire budget, we're able to reallocate, so that that ends up meaning that there's a really significant amount of flexibility. I think in the history of the contract, we've had few, if any, instances where an organization that was projected to overspend we weren't able to reallocate to meet those needs. So yeah, that said, we try to work really closely with you to develop budgets that are really realistic to the amount of work that you're anticipating doing around helping individuals increase awareness and apply for the CalFresh program. I just want to make sure you're keeping in mind things like cost of living adjustments, promotions, and then, again, the way this contract works is that it's a quarterly reimbursement, and those quarterly invoices also come with quarterly program reports. And then as we roll up and wrap up the federal fiscal year, the state will be asking for an annual report and narrative that's about a page in length. So I think we've talked a good amount about this. Reimbursements and the invoices are submitted within 10 days of the end of each quarter. And then those checks do take 4 to 6 months to be turned around by the state, because all of it needs to be rolled up to the state that then rolls it up to USDA. So I think it's important note for new organizations that would be subcontracting, just to anticipate that your organization would need to be in a place to float your costs for the first 6 months of operation before you're seeing checks come in. Yeah, so I'll turn it back over to Jake.
Great, thank you. So also the support that we provide with the contract. So we've managed this contract for 12 years and really enjoy providing the education, capacity, and support throughout the process. So this includes our CalFresh Outreach and Application Assistance trainings. We also facilitate a CalFresh task force. So basically that brings together various nonprofits providing application assistance, community-based organizations, and the County of San Diego's Health and Human Services Agency. And it's really a place where members can get the most up-to-date information about the CalFresh program, any updated guidelines or program changes, to share barriers that you're experiencing or case issues, and then also an opportunity to learn best practices from each other, especially as we navigate this virtual environment, but also as we expand out to those target populations that we had previously mentioned. So those take place on a monthly basis. And then other support is through local administrative advocacy. So we have a CalFresh Outreach liaison model where we're able to get case information and resolve case issues quickly with those Health and Human Services and eligibility staff. We've also created the CBO Access call line. So basically access where individuals and clients might call for information. CBO Access really helps community-based organizations access the information needed to provide follow-up and case management, and the development of the single reschedule line. So when individuals may have missed their interview, they're able to easily then reschedule that required interview to continue through the application process. And lastly, state administrative and legislative advocacy to help streamline the process and improve customer and also agency experience. So with that, I'd love to open it up to any questions that you may have about any of the information we've shared here. So I'll go ahead and open that up.
Well, I know it's a lot of information. We appreciate everybody's time. I know for some of you, this was probably a refresher. And for some of you, I know this is just a lot of content. So as you're starting to go through the electronic application packet, please feel free to reach out with any questions. Or, you know, as you've completed different pieces, if you want to run anything by us, we're happy to review information. Otherwise, we'll look forward to receiving applications from you by the 4th. We'll probably send a friendly reminder on the 2nd or 3rd if we haven't heard from you. And then we'll definitely be in touch that week after Labor Day with any questions that we have or any follow-up items. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Okay, with that, we're going to close out.
Thank you both. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Damaris.
Bye.
Amanda, I actually had a question.
Yeah.